Welcome to the Pensari Basketball YouTube channel's Mailbag Edition. My name is Robert, and today we're going to be talking everything Toronto Raptors next season projections. We're going to be talking about player development. We're going to talk about whether or not the Raptors are a sneaky contender in the East next season, how they might develop, what players I expect to pop. We're going to hear from Nick Nurse. We're going to hear from Scottie Barnes' trainer, B-Mac, and we're going to get to some of your questions. So if you're new around here, grab some coffee and let's get to it. So first of all, I want to clarify, this is not a hot take channel. We did not build up this community to basically devolve into ESPN's First Take. So I understand you out there probably saying, Rob, did you just say the Raptors might be contenders next year? What are you smoking? Well, I'm smoking coffee and I'm pretty amped up about this. And I promise it's not just because I've been binging Pascal Siakam and Scottie Barnes workout videos and over investing in what Nick Nurse had to say about what Precious Achiuwa is looking like right now. I really just believe that this team is being criminally slept on, like they always are. And I want to talk a little bit about what the pathway to potentially becoming a contender this year might be for the Raptors. Most people would project the Boston Celtics, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Miami Heat, and the Philadelphia 76ers as the top four teams in the Eastern Conference. Every single one of those teams has a projected starter who is well past their prime. For the Milwaukee Bucks, it's going to be Drew Holiday, who's 32, Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton, all on the wrong side of 30. For the Miami Heat, it's Jimmy Butler on the wrong side of 30, Kyle Lowry, who's 36 years old. The Philadelphia 76ers have a 32-year-old James Harden, a 36-year-old, 37-year-old PJ Tucker, right? These are core pieces that are, if NBA history has taught us anything, players are not the same after 32. We're not going to look at Chris Paul as the norm or LeBron James. These are exceptions to the rule, okay? And if we saw anything with Russell Westbrook last year, that's a former MVP. Players after the age of 32, 33, that athletic burst, when it goes fast. With all four of those teams, including with the Boston Celtics with Al Horford, now turning back the clock 1 year, is he going to be the same? Malcolm Brogdon, who's definitely up there in age, has a huge injury history. Danilo Gallinari. So I get why people are really bullish on some of these teams, but I want to remind you that last year at this time, we were projecting a finals of the Lakers and the Brooklyn Nets. No one was projecting the Raptors. I was there saying the Raptors would finish 7th, maybe with an upside of 5th, and they finished 5th. And I'm realizing that I was sleeping on the Raptors last year by projecting a 7th to 5th range. So why are we projecting the Boston Celtics, apart from the fact that they just went to the finals? Why are we projecting them as a top team in the East next year? Well, they had a fantastic offseason. I will give them that. But also because they had a fantastic turnaround around the New Year mark, right? So we are accepting that we are going to strike out who the Boston Celtics were in October, November, December, and we're just going to give them credit for what they did January onward. Okay, so I want to ask, if Jaylen Brown had gotten injured in the first round, or if Rob Williams and Marcus Smart had gone out in the first round and Boston had been wiped in the first or second round, like the Raptors were, would we still be so bullish? Yeah, sure. We probably would be. We would say, well, they were fantastic after January. Well, there's another team that was fantastic after January. It was the Toronto Raptors. The Toronto Raptors were amazing after January. They were a top 7 defense in the NBA, and I want to talk about how that happened. So the Raptors traded Goran Dragic plus a first rounder for Thaddeus Young. And I believe that Thaddeus Young had an amplifying effect on this roster. Namely, I think he had a huge effect on Precious Achiuwa, Scottie Barnes, Chris Boucher, right? Those three players specifically absolutely blossomed under Thad's leadership. And I think that having someone like Thaddeus Young is such a stabilizing force in your locker room that the amplifying effect on those three guys, all of whom, by the way, are key rotation players for you. One of them is a de facto starter and possibly your second option this year. I think having a guy who has that kind of impact on not only supporting the youth, but also emboldening them a little bit offensively, unlocking them a bit, is a huge thing. I want to talk about the fact that the Raptors played basically G Leaguers in the beginning of the season because they didn't have enough depth. I want to talk about that. They played Delano Banton, who probably wasn't ready to be a rotation player in the NBA, right? They played Malachi Flynn, who I don't think is really a rotation player in the NBA. They played Svi Mykhailiuk, who most people would argue should probably be out of the league right now. They played Utah, and that didn't work. Kem was injured half the season, right? Knee injury, face injury. OG Anunoby, their best defender, he missed half the season. Pascal Siakam started the season on the injury reserve. For the first 9 games when he came back, he was awful. He was absolutely terrible. Fred VanVleet started the season lights out. He really carried them. But after the All-Star break, Fred VanVleet shot 29% from 3. So I would argue that the Raptors had nothing go right for them last year. The only thing that really surprised was that Scottie Barnes was way more NBA ready. So let's talk about internal growth. Now, I'm not saying that players who are 29, 30 can't have a massive offseason leap. They can. But if history has taught us anything, players who take massive leaps tend to be a little bit younger. Look at James Harden going from Oklahoma City to Houston. That was the biggest single season leap of his career. He's never had that kind of leap before. How old was he? He's 22, 23 years old, right? Look at Tracy McGrady when he left the Raptors, right? He went to a new system in Orlando. That season was a huge leap. Look at Vince Carter, 2000 to 2001. That was a huge leap. These type of quantum leaps in production tend to happen for younger players. How much better do I think Scottie Barnes is going to get on a scale of 1 to 10 versus someone like Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, who are much further along in their careers and have probably already had that quantum leap at some point? Is there going to be a steady growth, right? So I look at this Raptors roster and I say, how many guys could be drastically better? He could go from a 15 point per game scorer to a 22 to 23 point per game scorer. Imagine that player in the playoffs last year healthy. I want you to imagine OG Anunoby all year injured. Now, I'm not going to do that thing where I say everything goes right for the Raptors and everything goes wrong for everybody else. There will be injuries, absolutely. But I want to ask, what is the compounding effect of Fred VanVleet having to play 40 plus minutes because he didn't have a backup? What is the compounding effect of having to run your starters into the ground game after game after game on injuries, on productivity, on efficiency, right? How efficient are you in the 38th minute that you're playing versus if somehow you had a backup like Otto Porter last year who could have spelled some of your wings some minutes, that now the minutes in the fourth quarter are not 39, 40, 41, but rather 33, 34, 35. How much more efficient does Pascal Siakam become having a guy like Otto Porter? How much more efficient is the team in general not having to implement a whole bunch of rookies who've never been a part of the system? So much is to be said, especially in the early part of the season, about continuity. Look at the Raptors' record against bad teams last year versus their record against good teams. It was like the Raptors were the anti-Bulls. The Bulls beat the crap out of terrible teams and really suffered against tougher competition. The Raptors, not so much. The Raptors played down to their competition. That is a sign of a young team that's inexperienced, that does not have vets, okay? And that's what the Raptors lacked last year. They didn't have vets in the rotation. What about this season? Chris Boucher is a year older. Fred VanVleet's a year older. These guys hadn't been leaders before. You got to look at that. Fred VanVleet may have been 27, 28 years old, but he had never been the leader of a team before. This year, he's had that 1 year of on-the-job training. He's learned. Pascal Siakam has never been the leader before. That was Kyle Lowry's team. It's Kyle Lowry's job. So 1 more year without that. Otto Porter, he was starting and playing major minutes for the team that just won the championship. The Raptors just added him for less than the mid-level exception. And yeah, I do believe that's being slept on. So, to conclude this rant, do I believe that the Raptors are going to be a hell of a lot better next year? Yes, I do. And what's a hell of a lot better than the 5th seed? 3rd seed? 2nd seed? I don't know. But what I do know is even if they win the exact same number of games, this is going to be a very, very difficult team to beat in the first round of the playoffs. So I want to cue in something that Nick Nurse said. I want to talk about the individual development a little bit before we go into the questions. In the individual development perspective, I think that Scottie Barnes, Precious Achiuwa are the 2 guys who are going to take a massive step up next year. We saw it in the first half of the season versus the second half of the season, how much these 2 players grew. Precious did not have much of a role or much development in Miami. He seems to have really been a different player. I believe when the year started that there were times where I questioned whether Precious Achiuwa would be a qualified D-League player or G-League player. I really thought he was one of the 5 to 10 worst players in the NBA to start the season. By the time the playoffs came around and he's switching on to Harden, He was honestly, when he guarded someone, that was when I felt more secure. I felt more secure with Precious Achiuwa guarding someone than I did with OG Anunoby and Scottie Barnes guarding someone. He grew so much. And if he has put in that type of work that Nick Nurse seems to believe that he has this offseason, and he's ready to take a quantum leap forward, and all indications are that he is, he could have a most improved player type season. Okay? Scottie Barnes, his trainer, BMAC, Brian McCon, right? He came on and he had a little interview with Aaron Rose. I'm going to play a little clip of that right now. And he seems to believe that Scottie has taken a major step forward, not only with his ball handling, with his offense, with his offensive assertiveness, with his, how tight his handle is, but also with his defense, his body. According to Brian, he is now 235 at 6% body fat. That's a chiseled Greek god, basically. So now you're going to have another team that's going to look at this team and say, okay, we have two really good wing defenders, or two switchable big wing defenders. Most good teams don't have more than two, okay? All right. We're going to put one on Pascal and we're going to put one on Scottie. Now, what are we going to do with OG? Well, he's going to feast in the post. Okay, well, we're going to switch that guy onto OG. Well, now Scottie's going to go nuts, right? So I think that this team is gearing up, not only defensively, but also offensively, to be an absolute terror in the league. Now let's hear what Brian had to say. We're going to play some clip from Nick Nurse, and then we're going to head into the mailbag.
I think we played Milwaukee 3-0, Boston 2-2, Philadelphia 3-1. Just going through, I mean, we those are the best teams in our league, and we had a pretty high winning percentage against them. We probably gave away too many games to teams that we shouldn't have, So 3-1, 5 games at most back from them. Something happened to him where he now understands what playing in the NBA is about, and he is on a mission. So I would say Scottie, Precious, Thad will be more ingrained in our team. Boucher will be better. Koloko will give us some depth. I didn't think we had great depth. And hopefully the rest of the guys stay the same. Mm-hmm. Fred, Pascal, a little bit better. And OG. OG stays healthy. That's a good team.
Getting them better offensively in the half court, as far as giving them go-to moves to get to. Our main goal is just to get him to be a lot more efficient in the half court, and of course working on his jump shot. So he's been progressing well. I think the first month after the season, he made a big leap. Like he jumped right into it, like right after the season. So he made a big jump there. He's very aware of what he needs to work on. He's very aware of his game, and so he's very mature in that aspect. So, and I watch every single game like live, and then I'll go back and watch sometimes. But it was an easy conversation, which, I mean, every conversation with Scottie is pretty. He's a completely different player. And I mean, that's been who he is every single summer that we've worked out. He just gets better and better and better. So right now he's way better. Like the workout that we had 2 days ago was the best workout that he's ever had with me. He moves as efficiently on the basketball court through his moves as good as any guard in the NBA. My point of view is that there's nobody his size that can move like the way that he moves on the basketball court with the ball. So his handles and footwork are like crazy. They're already really good, but now it's amazing. His jump shot is really coming along. He's not the main guy on the team, so he could average 12 assists a game. He could average 25 points a game. You really never know. Like, he's that unique. But I think he's going to have a much better season. I think they're going to make a deep playoff run. And I think he's going to be a major part of it. I think this year it's going to translate more to like winning games and winning games late. I think they had probably like 10 games that I watched that they probably should have won. But I think he'll do a better job of helping the team win games down the stretch because he's had better experience. So I don't know about like accolades, but I think he'll win. He'll help the Raptors win more games late because he has that experience, and he knows what it feels like. So I think.
Okay, now let's get into the mailbag. So Demille asks, what would be your redraft for the lottery part of 2021? Well, I don't have a full redraft for you, but I'll give you my top 7 in range. So 1, 2 would be Scottie and Evan Mobley in whatever order you wanna whoever you have on your roster. I could pick the other guy. Whoever doesn't go 1 goes number 2. 3, 4, 5 to me would probably be Cade, right? Cade and Josh Giddey and Jalen Green. Some order, depending again on what you want to do, who you prefer, right? Do you want to prefer playmaking? Do you want to prefer two-way impact? Do you want to prefer alpha score? Do whatever you want with those 3. After that, I would probably go with Franz Wagner and Herb Jones. So those are my top 7. In terms of who would definitely fall out of the top 10 for me if I was redoing a redraft, Davion Mitchell for Sacramento Kings, I think that would be outside the top 10 for me. And Jalen Suggs would be outside the top 10 for me if I was doing a redraft. Sean asks, what former Raptors would you like to get back? Kawhi Leonard. Easy. Cassius Clay asks, what is the coaching staff looking like? Do we still have Watson? Yes, we do have Earl Watson, and we also doubled down by also getting Rico Hines. I think those two are about the realest human beings in the NBA. They're awesome. They're really great for young players. We have a young team. I think they're going to have a huge impact on the young players. If there is a part of the coaching staff that I'm not super thrilled with, it's probably Trevor Gleason, but we'll see if he gets better. Cassius also asks, any more undrafted gems out there? Man, I really like Kenny Lofton Jr., but it seems like he's going to be playing for the Memphis Hustle this year. Cassius also asks, third question is, has the inside presence been addressed? Yeah, I think if you take Nick Nurse at face value, he thinks that Christian Koloko is going to play some minutes next year. I think Otto Porter is a very underrated defender who's, instead of, the 3-4 that he was in Washington, he's more like a 4-5 now. So he's not a big hypey shot blocker, but I think he's a very good defender. And I think rim defense could be addressed in a multitude of different ways. It doesn't always have to be shot blocking, but I do think that if Christian Koloko is going to play 10, 12 minutes a night off the bench for you in place of Khem Birch, then I think that's a huge upgrade in terms of shot blocking. Justin asks, who could we get for VanVleet and draft assets? Honestly, I don't know what Fred VanVleet's market is right now. There aren't a lot of teams that are looking for a 28-year-old undersized point guard because most teams are either set at point guard. It's the deepest position in the league. They either have a younger, cheaper option or a significantly better one, or they have an undersized 2 guard that Fred can't really play with. So I don't really know what you can get for him, or they're completely tanking like the Utah Jazz, right? A lot of people like to throw out the Donovan Mitchell for Fred VanVleet plus stuff package. I don't see why the Utah Jazz, who are openly tanking for lottery picks next year, are going to want someone like Fred VanVleet, who's naturally going to help you win games next season. Daryl asks, Orlando suddenly has a glut of young players. Who is going to take a step up on that team, and who is going to be the odd man out? Where do you see the Magic finishing in the East next season? I'll answer this backwards. I see them finishing bottom 3. In terms of who do I like? I like Jonathan Isaac a lot on that team, and I like Franz Wagner. I'm coming around on Paolo a little bit, but his defense really does worry me, and I don't know how those 3 guys play together, especially when you have Wendell Carter and Mo Bamba coming back playing center almost exclusively. I don't know if they see Paolo as a jumbo guard because he has some playmaking ability, and what that means for your other big guards like Jalen Suggs, 6'4", right? Markelle Fultz, 6'4". So if there's a one guy who's probably on the outs, it would probably be either Cole Anthony or Markelle Fultz and Jonathan Isaac in terms of the front court rotation. One of those guys is probably going to end up on the bench. Justin asks, the Raptor roster spots are getting tight, and instead the Raptors have continued to add. Do the Raptors have a trade brewing? Who are the few potential trade targets to complement the core using future draft assets and potential roster players? This team has a bright future, but by no means will internal growth be enough. What are examples of a few realistic but shrewd trades? All right, well, I do think internal growth will be more significant than people give it credit for. I really do think there are 4 or 5 guys on this team that could take a massive step up. Haven't even talked about Justin Champagnie. I think he could be so much better this year. I know we didn't see him in Summer League. I think Christian Koloko could grow a lot from the start of the year to the end. We've already talked about Scottie Barnes. We've already talked about Precious Achiuwa. But don't discount the fact that Pascal Siakam is in the lab this offseason. I think internal growth could be a huge thing for this team. And OG Anunoby, with an entire summer of offseason rumors of wanting a bigger role, you better believe he's going to be coming back and demanding that bigger role. So I think I think internal growth could be a huge thing for this team. But in terms of like, how would I balance out this team? Look, honestly, I would trade Gary Trent like tomorrow. I would trade him yesterday. I just don't know what you trade him for, because he's the only player of his type on your team, unless you want to consider Svi Mykhailiuk someone like him, right? The value of a guy who could just get his shot off whenever against tight shot clock, there's a value to this player type. So if you're going to trade him for a center like Jakob Poeltl or Miles Turner, which is what has been reported as a deal that might make sense, then I really do worry about on-ball creation. I worry about shooting a little bit too, right? I think if you're replacing it with Miles Turner, at least you're replacing a shooter for a shooter, and you're getting more defense in that exchange. But I'm not really sure if the dribble creation, sometimes too much of the same thing can be a bad thing, right? Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So I'm not really sure what I would trade Gary Trent for, but that's probably the player who would go out. And if what's coming back is a younger, cheaper version of him plus a contract, maybe for a team that's looking to contend now, well then I think the Raptors might be looking to contend now. So why would you take the downgrade, right? So I think it's more like Gary Trent plus Malachi plus Kem plus a couple of picks for something. I also want to address, there's a big reason why the Raptors are probably reluctant to package a whole bunch of future picks, because you see, if you're another team, you're not banking on the Raptors to ever be bad. With Masai and Bobby at the helm, this is a team that's generally going to be good. So those picks are not going to be worth a lot. But to you as the Raptors, those picks are going to be worth a ton, because unlike other teams that usually, are very much like crapshoots when it comes to the draft, the Raptors draft exceptionally well. So a 22nd pick in the hands of most teams, they might consider that a very valueless asset. But if you're the Raptors, you might draft a future All-Star at the 22nd pick. So I think the Raptors will be reluctant to move 3, 4, future picks. I don't ever see them moving more than 2 in a deal. But that being said, what could Gary Trent Jr., who's basically an expiring, Kem Birch, who's on a short deal and will be an expiring next year, Malachi Flynn, who could very easily be an expiring, what could that plus a couple of picks get you? I think it could probably get you an aging star. I think one of the things that might come up is Paul George, right, in LA. So if the Raptors could somehow package up enough to get him, if things go south in Clipperland and they want to hit reset, maybe something like that could work. I don't know who else I would be looking at in terms of that. Donovan Mitchell to me doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. I really don't think the Raptors are going to be outbidding 8 future draft picks from the New York Knicks. So I don't know what the Raptors could offer some of these teams that have these stars, right? Obviously, Kevin Durant remains my number one target, but yeah. So that's sorry if I'm not answering your question very well there, but that's the best I can do with that. Joseph asks, if we keep Fred VanVleet, who would be the best to back him up, given that he should be playing maximum 30 minutes? 2, what is the likelihood of landing Donovan Mitchell, and would you like to what you think it would take? Number 2, I think the likelihood of landing Donovan Mitchell is less than 1%. I really don't think that we have the type of assets, like what they would want back is Scottie Barnes plus picks. You're not giving up Scottie Barnes for Donovan Mitchell. So anything beyond that is a non-starter, because everyone else is kind of in their prime and is going to help you win games next year. That's not what Danny Ainge and the Jazz are looking to do. So I would put that as the minute they started blowing it up and tanking, I think Donovan Mitchell became a pipe dream for the Raptors. Now you said that Fred VanVleet should play 30 minutes max. I don't necessarily agree with that, but let's say hypothetically you're right. Who would be an ideal backup for him? Easy, Scottie Barnes. David asks, what are your thoughts on the latest Juan Heranomez signing? My thoughts are he will be very lucky to survive training camp. Dave Chaube asks, using the current day roster, what does the final 15-man roster look like? What do you think will be the pecking order within that rotation? Okay, so I think the top 9 are pretty much set in some order of Fred, Gary, Scottie, Pascal, and OG, right? That's 5. Your bench is Precious, Otto, Thad, Boucher. That's 9. Your two-way contract slots right now are Doughton and Ron Harper. So really it leaves 6, right? Kem is one of those guys. Malachi is one of those guys. Delano is one of those guys. So you have 3 left, right? So of those 3 spots, Christian Koloko is 1 for sure. I think Justin Champagnie is 2. And my 3rd would be Armani Brooks, to be honest. I would prefer Armani Brooks, and I would just outright stretch and waive Svi. If it is Svi and Armani Brooks is out because the Raptors cheap out on stretching his contract, I think that would be a mistake. I really like the chemistry between Armani Brooks and Scottie Barnes. Now, that all being said, what is the pecking order? Honestly, I don't know if there is a pecking order right now other than Pascal Siakam will be the first option on this team, right? I think it would be interesting for the Raptors to stagger Scottie with the second unit a lot. So, for instance, maybe Scottie's the first Raptor to go to the bench, like 4 minutes in. He kind of gets his feet wet. He's the first Raptor to go to the bench. And then somewhere around the 10-minute mark, he's the guy who comes in and runs the second unit. And maybe the guy who comes in for him is Thad, or someone who's a little less needing the ball to score, someone who's going to be a less primary option. And that way, Scottie spells Fred for 8 to 10 minutes. And then that's his run, right? And that way, he's playing a lot of minutes without Pascal, a lot of minutes without Gary, a lot of minutes without OG, and a lot of minutes without Fred. And he's running that second unit with nothing but shooters around him and cutters, right? Because Thaddeus Young, excellent without the ball. Otto Porter, excellent without the ball. Depending on who the guard is in that lineup, could be excellent without the ball. Chris Boucher really developed some chemistry with Thad Young moving off the ball. I'm sure that could carry over. I think Christian Koloko is a great roller. Scottie could have some great chemistry with him there. I don't know if Delano Banton is going to be in the rotation, but that could be something as well. So, look, I think that would be sort of the thing. I don't know if OG is going to be the second option. What I do believe is that Fred will not be the second option next year. I think that Fred will take a bit of a step back for the good of the team, but also because he's just not that efficient a scorer, man. Like, to be honest, like I think he is probably reading the tea leaves on the wall and realizing, hey, like there's a limited upside for a guard who can't finish in the paint, who can't create his own shot against longer mismatches and longer defenders. It's just too easy of a thing to shut down. Oh my God. Dave asks, "What? I know it's early, but what are your projected stats for our rotation players?" Honestly, I don't know that right now. I'll be honest, I don't know. I think OG could take a step up and average 20 points per game. I think Fred could take a more efficient approach to offense and maybe even start to approach 44-45% shooting and maybe be a lights out shooter more off the ball. I think Scottie could average 22 points per game next year. I also think he can go the complete other way and average 10 assists per game. Not really sure. It'll take some time. One thing I'm sure is that, or I'm very sure, is that OG, Scottie, and Precious are going to be very improved. And I think Pascal will also be improved. Dave also asks, speak on Otto Porter Jr. This is a huge signing that I don't think is getting enough headlines. Yeah, man, honestly, from the advanced analytics perspective, Otto Porter Jr. was pretty much the third or fourth most important Warrior last year. He was better than Clay for the most part. Again, in a limited role, he did start a handful of games for this team. I think they're going to miss him. I understand why they let him go, because they have all these lottery picks that need minutes from Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, James Wiseman, etc. But, man, he was incredible for them last year. And look, he's right in his prime right now. He's not 30 years old. He's had a huge injury history. That also means that he's not quite as old in NBA years, right? He's missed a whole bunch of time. This could be one of those late career resurgences that we've seen in a lot of players who've had a bunch of injury issues. There might just be, a 3-4 year bad luck with injury situation, and he figures out something with his body, figures out how to maintain it, figures out, maybe gets a surgery that fixes something, and suddenly you have like 2-3 years of a completely resurgent player who's just a lights out shooter. I think he fits in so well with what the Raptors do. He has huge two-way impact. He's multi-positional. He's versatile. He plays off the ball. He's incredibly smart. He's a good vet. Good human being as well. So I think it's very underrated. John asks, what do you think of trading for Jaylen Brown instead of Durant or Mitchell? I would prefer Brown, but would it muddy the pecking order with Siakam and Scottie? I was thinking maybe OG and Boucher and a couple first. What say you? I say the Boston Celtics hear your offer and they slam the phone. I don't see why in hell they would ever trade Jaylen Brown for that package. That's not shade on OG. I like OG a lot. I actually think OG and Jaylen are pretty comparable. But when you consider the optics of trading a guy who was effectively your best player in the finals for a guy who missed half the season last year, who's albeit a little bit younger, but not much younger, and who's a little bit further behind offensively, if not a lot further behind offensively, I just don't like it, and I don't like the fit, right? Jaylen Brown fits a lot better with Jason Tatum than OG does, in my opinion. So I don't like it. In terms of Jaylen Brown instead of Durant or Mitchell, I would still prefer Durant. If you can give me those three players, I think there's such a big gap between Durant, even at 34, between him and those two other guys, that it's not even close for me. And look, if you can keep Pascal or keep OG plus Scottie in that trade and you're still competitive, I think Durant makes you a contender for the next 2-3 years. I'm not sure if Jaylen Brown, especially if you're giving up a ton for him, makes you a contender any more than you already are. Mike asks a very tough question, which is recent debate sparked by Draymond Green saying the 2017 Warriors would beat the 98 Bulls. It'd be interesting if you break down how it would have gone down by looking at the statistics. Honestly, this sounds like a fantastic video essay. I can't do it right now, but this seems like something I would really love to go into. My initial gut is that the Bulls would win running away. Dave asks, our defense was good last year, should have been better with more length, high IQ players and cohesion. Rebounding, we were elite on the offensive glass, but subpar on the defensive glass. Simply preaching boxing out should help here. However, although we are nice in transition on offense, we really need to be much more efficient in half court. We were one of the worst assist teams, 29th last year. We didn't get to the free throw line nearly enough, 21st, and our true shooting percentage, 27th, was terrible. Do you see Fred VanVleet playing off the ball with Scottie Barnes and Pascal Siakam finding those mismatches? OG, Scottie Barnes, and Pascal Siakam should be bullying more to the post to get higher percentage shots and more free throw attempts, playing inside out more, getting open looks for Gary Trent, Fred VanVleet, and Otto Porter. Talk about what our defense and offense should look like to improve. Well, look, like last year, two of your highest percentage shot takers were also your least efficient shot makers, which was Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr., who both shot pretty putrid from the field. However, when you consider how many threes those guys were taking, their true shooting percentage and their effective field goal percentage was up, right? Relative to other guys who take that many shots, I think they were fairly okay. Like they were not great, but they were fine. I think when you look at only field goal percentage, you miss how many threes the Raptors are taking. And the Raptors took a lot of threes last year between those two players. Now, that being said, do I think that obviously a Scottie Barnes post-up is more efficient than a Fred VanVleet 3 in terms of shooting percentage? Yes, of course. It will always be more of an efficient shot. But in order for it to be a better shot, then Scottie has to convert on those shots like at a higher percentage by a lot than Fred VanVleet converts on threes. I think that the offense last year was a little bit stagnant because there were always two guys on the court in Scottie and Pascal who couldn't reliably shoot threes. You can add Chris Boucher to that. You can probably add Thaddeus Young to that because he's not a very high volume three-point shooter, even though he made a high volume of his attempts. So I think by improving your overall shooting and spacing, you will allow a lot of those post opportunities to be a little bit more efficient. Now, you talked about the defensive rebounding versus the offensive rebounding. To be honest, that's a scheme thing, right? The Raptors crashed the offensive glass because they always wanted to win the possessions battle. But I don't think that that's going to be the modus operandi this year, right? It doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to be as aggressive on defense trying to win possession battles because the talent has been massively upgraded this year, either through internal growth or through the addition of Otto Porter, or through the fact that Pascal Siakam is now starting the season healthy and hopefully in better spirits. So I'll be very curious to see if some of those schemes don't get flipped a little bit. I would like to see, and probably we will see, Fred VanVleet take a bit of a backseat more on offense. So that immediately should make your field goal percentage go up a little bit more. But I think that there's a sort of cascading effect of having guys who are just better spacers and not having net negatives like Delano Banton and Svi Mihailovic and Malachi Flynn on the court for extended periods of time, because last year you realize that the Raptors did play a lot of guys who probably under normal circumstances probably wouldn't be getting minutes. So, all right. Dan asks, if Kawhi had come back for another year, do you think the Raptors win another title? Yes. Yes, I do. Matt asks, realistically, how do you foresee minutes being divvied up in the early part of the season, and would Coach Mishevich do anything differently? Well, I think I answered this sort of as in terms of how I would stagger Scottie's minutes with the second unit. In terms of, would I do anything drastically different? No. I think Nick Nurse is really smart. I think, I would like to see either OG or Scottie get a ton of minutes with the second lineup, with the second unit. I would probably explore the concept, at least the concept, of Scottie and Fred starting in the backcourt together, with Scottie guarding the 2 and Fred guarding the 1, right? But Scottie playing the 1 and Fred playing the 2. I think that would immediately make you a lot bigger, and I would probably start Precious at the center spot, so it's just be super big. And I think that would also allow your bench to not be 4 big guys, right? I think Gary Trent Jr. could then come off the bench, but we have seen in the past that Gary Trent is just so much better as a starter, so that's a little bit clunky for me. Matt also asks, I feel pretty great about how our cap space has been spent leading into the season. Which of the Raptors' existing salary commitments makes you most uncomfortable, and why? I think the one that makes me most uncomfortable is Gary Trent, not because I don't think he's worth what he is making, but because he's an expiring, and yeah, you'd be able to sign him using the bird rights that you do have. However, I don't know if you necessarily want to commit to this guy with extensions coming for OG, Pascal, Fred, Scottie, Precious. Like, there's a lot of guys who are going to be making a ton of money within the next 3 years, and to have a guy who, in all honesty, Nick Nurse hasn't mentioned him once in his interview in Hungary. Masai went 2 straight hours last year not mentioning this guy, so I think that's one contract that makes me uncomfortable a little bit, just because it could just be one of those things where you just don't bring him back, you lose him for nothing if you don't trade him right now, because there's no need for him to facilitate a sign and trade for you next offseason. So I guess it makes me nervous because it's almost like a ticking clock situation. If there's another contract that makes me a little bit nervous, it's Khem Birch, because I think far be it for me to say that injuries are anyone's fault, but it does feel a lot like what the Raptors paid for is a version of him that maybe is, we often talk about players having a big close to a season. Sometimes it's rookies. Like, people will cite that Malachi Flynn was great in the last month in Tampa, or Jalen Harris, or Davion Mitchell last year was great. But to be honest, to be great in the last month of the season when you don't have much to play for and other teams are sort of gearing up for the playoffs, it doesn't mean a lot to me. And I think Kyle Lowry is one quote that really sticks in my mind, is that he said that, we're really trying to get Khem, I'm just trying to get Khem paid before I leave. And he did get Khem paid, but I think that it's really difficult for me to understand how Khem Birch is supposed to do what he did in Tampa without a guy like a game manager like Kyle Lowry setting him up for all those. Is Scottie Barnes going to do it? Is Fred VanVleet? And I don't think Fred VanVleet could do it if he tried. This has been a really fun edition. Hopefully this didn't go too long. I know YouTube likes to penalize videos for going over an hour, so hopefully we kept it under. But thanks a lot for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit like, hit notifications, leave a comment below. What do you think? Do you think the Raptors are going to be contenders next year? Who do you think is going to win the title? Who do you think is coming out of the East? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, as I said, hit subscribe, hit notifications. I'll see you next time.